Hi class, welcome to week 3 of the course on Wraparound in Systems of Care. I'm Eric Bruns, and as you know, along with Marlene Matarese, I am your instructor for this class. I'm here live. Hopefully this will work well for those of you who are watching the lecture using YouTube. Hopefully all of the slides will show up and everything. In the past I have done narrated PowerPoints, but it seemed as though since we have so little face-to-face interaction, at least maybe one of the lectures would let you see one of us in the flesh. So this is my first lecture of the course this year, week 3, and in this week we're focusing on the practice model for Wraparound. In weeks 1 and 2, using resources from 2 different main places that you're relying on for this class. One is the National Wraparound Initiative website. The second, the book written by 2 of my professional heroes, Ira Laurie and Carl Dennis, really putting out there a whole array of extraordinary stories about families overcoming needs and overcoming challenges with the help of Kaleidoscope, one of the first so-called wraparound programs in the country. So up till now you have started to look at some of the readings in the Resource Guide to Wraparound, the principles of wraparound, and some other background materials. You'll be looking at a whole bunch more articles from the NWI Resource Guide, and you've been reading these chapters, these family stories in Carl and Ira's book. Today we're going to get a little bit deeper into the details of what it takes to actually implement Wraparound. One of you in one of your discussion boards referenced that you liked the way Wraparound brings the head and the heart together. So I think that if you have the heart represented in the stories that Ira and Carl tell in their book, we're also going to try now to start weaving in some of the head, so to speak, some of the thinking behind and the research behind Wraparound and what it takes to actually do it on the ground level so that families can experience the kinds of positive outcomes that so many of Carl's families, even with the most challenging children and young adults that were part of those families, so many of them experienced better lives thanks to the Wraparound process. So let's start there this week. Let's ask this question. What is the need that we're trying to meet? From a really big picture perspective, each one of these little smiley faces represents 10,000 children or young people in the United States who have so-called serious emotional problems or serious emotional disturbance. We don't really like that term in the wraparound world, but it is a legal term and represents a level of need that includes a mental health diagnosis, some kind of impairment in functioning in homeschool or community. And it's for these approximately 8 to 10 million young people across the country that we're looking to meet their needs and improve their lives. Sadly, research shows that if out of the 10 or so million young people with serious emotional and behavioral needs, only about 20% receive any kind of intensive service. And an even smaller proportion, equal to about this little tiny sliver of all of the need in our country, receive a research-based intervention like wraparound, multisystemic therapy, functional family therapy. This is why we need to understand what the outcomes of wraparound are, what the potential benefits are. This is why we need the field to absorb the stories that Carl and Ira are telling us about the successes that can be had even for the most challenged youth and families when we apply these kinds of practice models. And it's also why we need to learn how to actually implement these practice models in our systems. That's what our course is all about. So what is the wraparound process? Well, this is review for you all at this point. Wraparound is a family-driven, team-based process for planning and implementing services and supports. Wraparound is not the service or the intervention itself. It's the process of bringing together folks to actually ensure that the family has a plan that is likely to be successful in meeting their needs. So through the wraparound process, a team is created to create plans that are geared towards meeting the unique and holistic needs of these youth and their parents and caregivers and families. The wraparound team members on any young person's wraparound team meet regularly. So sometimes in child welfare, for example, there's something called family group decision making, where a plan is created out of a group process. But then the team does not necessarily reconvene. In wraparound, there is a team, there is a plan, and that team meets regularly to ensure that the plan is actually getting implemented and is being successful. Team members include people who are relevant to the success of the identified youth, including parents and caregivers, other family members, but also professionals, people who are paid to care, such as mental health professionals, educators, people from the families or from the youth's school, system representatives if they're involved in juvenile justice, if they have a probation officer, if they have a child welfare caseworker, and other individuals who may be instrumental to helping this young person succeed going forward. Now, another thing that was written in one of the discussion boards in week 1 is one of the classmates asked, well, wraparound seems wonderful, but wouldn't we want wraparound to be available not just to the young people with the most serious and complex needs, but perhaps children and adolescents with all types of needs, even emergent needs, so that we can intervene early enough to make sure that they don't get any deeper into trouble, deeper into the system. And we agree that the wraparound principles are things that we would want to apply to all of our helping, to all the services and all the help that we provide to families. But there's a difference between trying to infuse the principles in all of our services and supports versus doing the very intensive wraparound process, which requires quite a bit more commitment of resources, which are very scarce in our system. So you could say that, as you learned last week, wraparound principles could be applied to youth being served by any helper or in any service. We would hope that service providers would honor family preferences, that they would create plans that are in fact holistic. They attend to the needs of parents, siblings, and others who are important to the child or the youth. They involve others, other systems, parents, family members, natural helpers wherever possible. They be committed to keeping kids at home and to unconditional positive regard and unconditional care. They would be strengths-based, and they would they would generate plans for the service that's individualized to the youth or family's needs. We would in fact expect that all of these principles would be applied in all of our helping. As for the process, though, which is the focus of this week's lecture and this week's readings, what about the practice model for wraparound? It takes the wraparound principles and takes them to another level. We reserve a full wraparound process where a care coordinator with caseloads of 10 to 1 or lower are organizing the planning and implementation effort. We reserve that kind of intensity for youth with the most complex needs who are experiencing the biggest heartbreak for their families and costing systems the most of their resources. The process involves a team that works together to meet the youth and families' needs. That doesn't necessarily happen in a formal way if we're just applying the principles. The full wraparound process, like I suggested already, requires investment in specific roles: a care coordinator or a facilitator, a family, and possibly a youth peer support worker. These are individuals that we invest time and effort and dollars hiring and training and getting to a level of fluency. The wraparound process, as we'll learn in a little bit, undertakes a very specific series of steps to help achieve the principles that you learned about last week. Engagement, crisis planning, prioritization of needs. All of these things require skillful service delivery and coordination, care coordination, and facilitation. Specific methods for building on strengths, having a team work together well, developing an individualized plan, monitoring progress, and so forth. So, again, point here being, we do want to apply the wraparound principles to all of our services. The wraparound process is a very intensive and specific set of skilled activities that take place. I already mentioned this a little bit, but let's just kind of confirm who wraparound is for. If you look at all of the 150 million, for example, 120 million young people in the United States, we know that many have all youth have needs. All youth have needs for being nurtured, for learning, for being supported in their community to succeed. But some young people's needs are less complex than others. We know that, in general, about 80% of children and adolescents will probably do pretty well with in communities that have availability of health care. They have assets such as parents, family members, half-decent schools. But when you get into the next level of need, 15% of young people may need some kind of targeted intervention, some kind of specific therapy for a mental health problem, perhaps a support for them to overcome a learning disability. Perhaps they have a medical need that will require attention over time, medication, or some kind of medical attention. So we know that while 80% of young people will probably succeed with universal health promotion and education, 15% are going to need a targeted intervention, and perhaps 2 to 5%, depending on the community that you're in, are going to require intensive intervention that might require coordination of multiple kinds of help. It's for these young people that we suggest systems need to invest in intensive multimodal interventions like the wraparound process. Now, why do we need the wraparound process for this highest need segment of our society? Well, working with youth with complex needs and multiple system involvement is a very challenging process, and outcomes for these young people are the poorest of all of those in the continuum. When you have young people with multiple needs and complex needs, there's naturally an understanding that we need to address those needs through a holistic and coordinated kind of plan. Multiple and overlapping problem areas need attention. Family members and parents often have unmet basic needs or their own mental health or substance abuse problems. When you get to that level of complexity of child and family needs, it makes a lot of sense, intuitive sense, that the system assigns someone to help the family navigate and negotiate all of the different services that they may need, so that they don't have to do that navigation themselves. Another reason we need care coordination for the youth with the most complex needs in their families is that we know that no matter what level of need, families are rarely fully engaged in services. And not just the most complex needs kids, but all kids and their families often drop out of services. In fact, up to 60% of young people and their families don't return for a second appointment when they've attended an initial mental health therapy session. Our systems are in silos. What does that mean? Special education, mental health, primary health, juvenile justice, child welfare. Each of these systems for kids was created to support a certain type of need, to educate a young person despite their learning disabilities or their behavioral problems, to address their past trauma or their mental health diagnosis, depression, anxiety, conduct problems, behavior problems. When youth offend in the community, to restore justice to that community and ensure that there's accountability. Child welfare, which exists to protect young people. All of these systems may be involved in the life of a single child, but each of them have their own philosophy, structure, funding streams, eligibility criteria, and mandates. And the fact of the matter is that when a young person has multiple needs that might span multiple of these systems, the systems don't work well together for individual families unless there's a way to actually bring the resources together and the planning process together into one place, into one room. If we don't have that kind of coordination, what often happens is that young people get passed from one system to the next, each one deferring responsibility to the other. Families get extraordinarily overwhelmed and confused by the process of trying to live up to all the mandates and obtain help. And oftentimes what happens is that this just leads to the hopelessness and the chaos that a family experiences. And oftentimes families have to wind up relinquishing custody to get the help that they need. Children getting placed out of home is all too often the outcome when families become overwhelmed to that point. As just an example or an illustration of how complex some of these families' lives are, hopefully you can see this on your computer screen at home. But this is data from Wraparound Milwaukee. You watched the Wraparound Milwaukee video last week. Wraparound Milwaukee is one of the most noteworthy and famous wraparound initiatives in the world. They have data going back 20 years. These data show the types of problem areas that young people that they served, about 1,000 young people at this point in time, what were their problem areas as they came into the attention of Wraparound Milwaukee? 87% had some kind of school or community concern. 62% had severe aggressiveness. 46% drug or alcohol abuse. 43% had run away in the past. And all of these other areas, history of sexual misconduct, suicidal behavior, a victim of past sexual abuse, experienced by substantial minorities of the young people. Notice that these percentages don't add up to 100. That means that for most young people that are in this wraparound program, they have multiple of these issues going on. Similarly, look at the issues experienced by the families. Again, you might have a hard time reading some of these things. I'll read them to you. All of the following experienced by half or more of the families enrolled in Wraparound Milwaukee. Past incarceration, a history of child protective service involvement, substance abuse by the caregiver, having their own abandonment by a parent. And then certain things that happen not for a majority of the families, but for a substantial minority. Domestic violence, a parent with a past felony conviction, serious mental illness of a parent, and so forth. These are really, really challenging, multi-need families. And they don't experience outcomes that are very positive very often. When you know what you need to do, if there's a single one or two problem areas that can be addressed with an evidence-based therapy or practice, then by all means do it. But if you don't know where to start, if the issues seem overwhelming, wraparound is often the step that is required and the solution that systems invest in to try to achieve the most positive outcomes that are possible for these very, very complex needs families. Okay, so before we talk about the specifics of the practice model, let's just sum up why we invest in wraparound in our systems, both from the family perspective as well as from the system perspective. let's talk a little bit about a family. You read about some of these families in Carl and Ira's book. This is the Evans family, not their real name, but this came from the files of a very real project, Wraparound project, that my colleagues John Vandenberg and Jim Rast were working on. When they were doing file reviews, they came across the Evans family and felt like it was just such a good example of why we need Wraparound, this family. So the Evans family, real briefly, Crystal and Tyler are the parents in their mid-30s. They have 3 kids, David, and then twins, Kyle and Kaya. David was the identified child in the Wraparound program. The major needs of this family were pretty extensive. Crystal has depression and suicidal ideation. But what's really extraordinary is she also is the major breadwinner for the family. And despite this often incredibly burdensome, crushing depression, she goes to work every day as a waitress and has been a stable source of income for this family. Tyler has a lot of skills. This is the father. He's got a lot of skills, a mechanic, has worked on cars and motorcycles, but he has a history of alcoholism and has had a hard time keeping a job. He's unemployed currently. David, the identified youth in this particular Wraparound program, has been arrested multiple times. He's currently in juvenile detention, and the system is saying that he's not making adequate progress and may be moving to a higher level of care. David's also 2 years behind in school, and to the appearance of the professionals, he doesn't seem to care about this. I bet Carl Dennis could probably shift that perspective of the professionals through his skillful work. The twins, they were viewed, a neighbor witnessed an incident in which Tyler disciplined them roughly after some misbehavior. They've been characterized as having been abused by Tyler and are now in specialized foster care. They have diagnoses of their own, which may or may not be appropriate in terms of bipolar disorder. But we do know that they're often very aggressive, disruptive at school, and aren't working at grade level. So major needs of this family, but also extraordinary strengths. These parents are still together. They're committed to trying to figure out how to make a better life for themselves and their children, and to do whatever it takes to be a family again. In fact, their vision for the future is one in which their family is together and is able to enjoy one another's company. A pretty modest vision for the future, but nonetheless would represent huge progress from where they're at right now, with all of their children out of the home. So here's where Wraparound becomes such an obvious potential need. This family, as we look through the files, has 26 helpers, 5 from schools, 2 from the technical school that David's attending, child welfare caseworker, 2 specialized foster care caseworkers, a probation officer for David, 6 therapists across the 5 of them, 6 mental health specialists across the 3 kids, 3 adult mental health providers, including a psychiatrist for Crystal and her individual therapist, employment services, Alcoholics Anonymous, and the housing department trying to help them move into a bigger home that's actually up to code. Out of all of this, 2 IEPs, a plan from the Technical Center, the Bailey Center, a permanency plan, a specialized foster plan, a probation plan, 3 children's mental health treatment plans, 2 adult mental health treatment plans, employment services. In the end, without care coordination, this family is trying to figure out how to manage 35 different treatment goals across 13 different plans. And if you look at the appointments that they're expected to attend in any given month, child welfare, probation officer 2, psychologist 2, psychiatrist 1, David's therapist 4, restitution services 4, appointments for probation, I could just go on and on, 8 group rehab settings. You add them all up, this family is expected to figure out how to get to 42 different appointments in the month that we looked at the files. And that's not even including the AA meetings that Tyler goes to preserve his sobriety. And not surprisingly, these are the comments from professionals in their files. Parents don't respond to the school's calls. This family is dysfunctional. The parents are resistant to treatment. The home is chaotic. David does not respect authority. The twins are at risk due to the parental bad attitude, and so on and so forth. It's not surprising, and this is not an uncommon situation for a family that winds up in a wraparound initiative. But as we saw from the early slides, all too frequently there isn't any sort of care coordination for families with this level of complex needs, which is why so many systems invest in wraparound. From the system perspective, this is what traditional services wind up creating. If not 13 plans, at least perhaps 4. Multiple systems, each touching an individual member of the family, and thus resulting in multiple plans. In wraparound, what we're trying to do is achieve a situation where we're actually putting the youth and the family at the center of the planning process rather than the systems and their resources. We're bringing to bear the resources and the skilled individuals who are representing those systems and bringing them to bear to helping the family, creating one plan. Others are brought in to create that plan, including natural supports, such as extended family, neighbors, and friends, and community supports, such as neighborhood resources. The guy in the corner who runs the bike store that David actually took a liking to because he has cool dirt bikes and helped him learn how to tune one up one day before he wound up in detention. Civic supports, so the members of nonprofits who may have interacted with this family, and faith-based supports such as the Evans Church that they used to attend fairly frequently but have become estranged from. Let's bring those people back, people who are in roles that could actually help support this family, help them feel like they have a support network, help them think about ways in which they can draw from community resources to achieve their goals and meet their needs. And most critically, in terms of system resources, we have a facilitator and very possibly a parent and or youth partner whose job it is to bring all of this together, whose job it is to convene the team, to create the plan, to monitor progress over time, and revise the plan if it's not working well. So I'm going to pause for 1 second. I think we need another 10 minutes. Okay, I'm sorry, Liz.
No worries.
Okay. So again, for which children and youth are wraparound intended? The youth with needs that span home, school, and community, those with needs in multiple life domains, those for whom there are many adults involved, and those adults need to work together well for the youth to succeed. And finally, the youth, taking a look at it from a system perspective, wraparound is for the young people who are consuming the majority of our children's services resources. Wraparound facilitation and the availability of flexible funds to make sure that plans have resources to draw upon, they may cost upwards of $3,000 a month. Some people find that an extraordinary expense, $30,000, $35,000, $40,000 a year to do community-based care planning for these young people. But compared to residential treatment centers, which may be $700 to $1,000 a day, juvenile detention, which is $5,000 to $8,000 a month, long-term foster care, $2,000 to $4,000 a month. Wraparound is a way of keeping kids in the community so we can also conserve the resources that we might be spending on those out-of-community placements. From the system perspective, we did a study in Washington State here some years ago and found that the 9% of kids who received services from 2 or more systems used 48% of our children's mental health dollars, even though they were only 9% of all the young people receiving services in the system. Of all those 45,000 children, 4,200 that were receiving services from 2 or more systems used up half of our dollars. So here's where we want to focus when it comes to investing in wraparound and enrolling youth and families in wraparound. Okay. Oh, and similarly, of those children, again, 45,000, who used services from our public systems in Washington State, if they were involved in only one of those systems, only 14% of them had been placed out of home at some point in the past year. If they used more than one Department of Social and Health Services program, 68%, all of these kids had experienced an out-of-home placement. So again, wraparound is for the young people with complex overlapping needs or involvement in multiple systems, both for the sake of the family and for the system. So let's turn now to the practice model in a little bit more depth. We've already heard what's different in wraparound. There's an integrated plan. It's designed by a team. That's a team of people who are important to the family. People who do care and will be there for the young person indefinitely, as well as those who are paid to care. The plan is driven by and owned by the family and youth, not by the systems. The plan focuses on not problems, not diagnoses, but priority needs as identified by the family. There's 2 things going on in there. The care coordinator is going to go through a process of identifying the family's needs in their own words and their own priorities, not the priority of the systems. Not this kid's need is to stop hitting other kids at school. No. If the family can put it in a way that really speaks to the hole in the heart of this family or child, that's what's going to shift the language and shift the planning dynamic. Instead of Chris needs to stop hitting other kids, how about Chris needs to get up in the morning feeling like there's a reason to go to school? Shifts the dynamic, leads to much more proactive planning. How can we work together to ensure that Chris feels like he wants to go to school, and when he gets there he's going to succeed? The strategies in the plan include supports and interventions across multiple life domains and settings. So we're going to be looking at potentially behavior support plans, school interventions, basic living supports, family supports, help from friends and relatives, employment at that bike shop, volunteering at the church. We're going to pull all of that into one plan. We're not going to have multiple siloed plans. And finally, the strategies in the plan are going to include supports for parents, siblings, and other family members. How does this happen? The National Wraparound Initiative worked with its experts over time to identify a way of conceptualizing the wraparound process from beginning to end. What we came up with is a 4-phase process. The first phase is engagement and support for the family. You're going to be reading about this in the chapter from the resource guide to wraparound that you have. Engagement and support and team preparation is the first phase of wraparound. The second phase is plan development. The third phase is the longest phase, implementation. So a little bit about the time frames here. The engagement and team preparation phase, 1 or 2 meetings over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. Ideally not any longer. We want to get to planning. We want to convene that team. Once that team is convened, the plan development process, again, 1 or 2 team meetings. The engagement phase is our meetings between the care coordinator and the family, with their natural supports present if they prefer. The first team meeting is, in fact, the kickoff of the initial plan development. The plan is not developed until the team is convened and the information that the facilitator pulled together in the first phase is brought into that team context. That takes, again, 2 to 3 weeks. Implementation phase. How long does Wraparound take? We get to ask this question all the time. How long should families be enrolled in Wraparound? There's no artificial limits. We keep families in Wraparound until meaningful, reasonable progress towards their needs has been achieved. Preferably, the needs have been met. But regardless of whether they're fully met or not, progress has been made to the point where the formal Wraparound process is no longer needed. For one family, that might be 4 months. For another, it could be 12 months. For yet another, it might be 18 months, perhaps even 2 years. But the important thing is to establish early on in your engagement and plan development phase, what are the priority needs we're working on? What's the vision for this family's future? And when you're in the implementation phase, you are measuring progress towards those things throughout and feeding that information back. If progress is being made, then we're moving towards transition. If it's not being made, we need to revise the plan. One of the slogans of Wraparound, or phrases you'll hear, is families don't fail, plans fail. If a plan fails, we need to revise the plan. So, 4 phases of Wraparound. In phase 1, like we said, the care coordinator and possibly a family support partner, if they're available, meet with the family on their terms and in their turf to discuss the Wraparound process and listen to the family's story. Understand what's brought them to this intensity of support. The care coordinator and family partner assess for safety and make sure that there's a support plan if necessary. Safety and ensuring that the family is dealing with immediate crises is always a first priority. Assuming that has been managed and dealt with, the care coordinator and family partner's job is simply to open their ears, empty their mind, and listen to their family's story. Listen for their vision for the future. Listen for people who care about the family as well as people that they have found to be helpful in the past. And reach agreement about who will come to the first team meeting to develop a plan. And where will we have that meeting? Who will be there? The whole point of the engagement and team preparation phase is to ensure that the family really feels as though this is going to be a new experience for them. Some things that are going to feel different to the family are, this helper is someone who is not emphasizing problems or reciting my problems or my child's diagnoses. They're emphasizing our story. They're emphasizing uncovering what our deep needs are. And they're going to work with us to develop competence. So we're moving from emphasizing problems to emphasizing needs and competence. As you read in the stories from Carl and Ira's book, the individuals who are helping families in Wraparound are not experts. They're closer to allies, you know. Carl talks about trying to frame himself as an accountable friend for some of these families. We're moving from professionals being viewed as an expert to serving in a role of accountable ally, someone who will walk with them through this process. We're going to move from working on professional turf to working on family's turf. And we're going to go from teaching to learning with the family. These are the kinds of shifts that the family should really tangibly feel during the engagement and team preparation phase of Wraparound. As we've already talked about, another thing that's going to happen during the engagement and team preparation phase is we're going to bring the relevant expertise to the cause of the planning process and to the cause of meeting those needs. The facilitator, the parent or youth partner, elders, teachers, parents and grandparents, but of course also those who are paid to care, therapists, mentors, as well as the young person, him or herself, and ideally friends of this young person. People that can help him or her feel as though this is not something that they're in with just a bunch of adults, but someone who they can really rely on for their own support. Okay, phase 2. The initial plan development will take place over 1 or 2 meetings held over ideally no more than 2 weeks. The facilitator or care coordinator will convene and conduct a first child and family team meeting with those people who are providing services, as well as those people who are connected to the family through community, friends, and faith. The team will review the raw materials that the care coordinator has created and learned from the family during the engagement phase. What did the family say that its vision for a positive future is? In their own words, what was that vision for a positive future? So often, like I was saying about the Evans family, it's a really straightforward statement. We envision a future where we are all together and happy. We envision a future where David is succeeding in life and is happy and healthy. We envision a future where we all laugh and play together. These are the kinds of visions of the future that families will often come up with during the engagement phase. So in the team preparation phase, you're reviewing that family vision for the future. You're also developing a mission statement about the team. This is a way of engendering cohesiveness and collaborativeness among the team members. So a collective mission statement for a wraparound team might be, our job is to work hard, never give up, and make sure that this family meets its vision for the future. Could be as simple as that. What else is done? In the engagement phase, the care coordinator has assembled a set of potential priority needs for the family. Needs that span school, community, home, perhaps employment, health, culture, being connected to other families, or being connected to their own extended family. Whatever the family comes up with in terms of priority needs, the team is now reviewing them and asking, which is going to be the first one that we work on? What is the need that is most important? Remember the one that I shared before. Chris, or David, or Jeannie, or whomever, needs to feel like there's a reason to get up and go to school in the morning. Perhaps the need is framed in terms of the mother. Chris's mother, David's mother, Crystal. Crystal needs to feel like she is keeping her son safe. Crystal needs to feel like she is succeeding as a parent. Again, not deficit-oriented or problem-oriented statements, but the kind of statements that make people want to really mobilize around filling that hole in the family's heart that might be the basis for suffering and heartbreak and bad behavior. So in the team, the plan development process, they're looking at those needs statements, making sure they're phrased in that way and asking, what's the 1 or 2 that we're going to take on first? And they're going to come up with different ways to meet those needs that match up with the family's strengths. So we're not just pulling them off a shelf. Oh, well, there's a therapist out there. Oh, we need therapy. We need special ed. We're creatively brainstorming. We're brainstorming things that are going to meet these needs that may be very out of the box. They may not be. They're going to be individualized to this young person and family. Over the course of the next few weeks, you're going to see some really great examples of unique, individualized plans of care. And then finally, different team members will agree to take on different tasks that have been agreed to. So a couple points about planning. We're moving from reactive to proactive planning. So reactive planning might be a part of plan development where you focus on the big behaviors that these young people often have. But it has associated risks. Behavior-focused plans typically produce temporary, context-specific change. We want the change to generalize to the entire youth and family's life. So proactive planning is about focusing on the process of meeting priority needs, not just a behavior, for example. We're looking at an outcome orientation that's bigger than just stopping a behavior. This leads to higher cohesiveness on teams, increases self-sufficiency and independence, and helps engender hope that this is something that's going to last and endure. Needs-based plans produce lasting change. Behavior-focused plans may be important, but they produce temporary change. One more little point about planning. We talked about it being strengths-based. Being strengths-based does not just mean listing strengths. It means going much deeper to identifying and leveraging functional strengths that we can actually use in our planning process. So what's an example of that? Well, listing a strength in a child and family plan might be something like David likes football. Okay, it's nice to know. Can we get a little bit deeper? David likes to watch football with his uncle on Sundays. Ah, okay, that's giving us a little bit more. Now we know that there's an uncle that we might involve in this planning process and in this plan. How if we get even deeper? David enjoys hanging out with his uncle. One of the reasons is that David does well in social situations in which he feels like he can contribute to the conversations. Watching football is one activity in which David doesn't feel anxious about being stupid or worried about not saying the right things. Now we have some really rich information about David's strength and how we might use it to help him feel more confident and secure and possibly help meet his needs. Okay. Based on the child and family team planning meetings, the team has created a written plan of care, and we're moving into the implementation phase. Action steps have been created, team members are committed to do the work, and the team comes together regularly. Implementation phase again. Could last 4 months, could last a year, could last longer. But the team meets regularly to do several things. It's reviewing accomplishments. It assesses whether the plan is working. It adjusts things that aren't working within the plan. And regardless if it's because you're taking on a new need or changing the plan to be more effective, we're assigning new tasks to team members. Implementation. If there's one thing during the implementation phase that I think is really critical for us to leverage and use in terms of research on social services, it's the idea that if we set goals or establish needs and track progress towards them, we are going to be much more likely to succeed. And as a care coordinator or facilitator, this is one of your biggest tasks in the implementation phase. And yet, we often find it's one of the tasks, one of the activities of the wraparound process that's least likely to happen. It's a huge problem. We need to focus on systematic tracking of progress towards meeting priority needs or achieving the outcomes that the family has identified. If you track the progress, it'll facilitate a good, productive team conversations about what action steps are and aren't working, which action steps are working, and which things should we continue to do. And of course, it allows you to celebrate success. If you see success occurring and you're tracking that, it gets people very, very fired up, and it helps you avoid the crisis of the week. If you're making progress on the biggest outcome that you've established for the family, no matter what they're coming into the meeting with, you can say, we are succeeding. We're doing something right. If you're not making progress on the highest priority needs, then you know it's time to adjust the plan. We're not going to wait for an even bigger failure. We're going to start adjusting right now. So, as an example, very simply, perhaps you can rate on a 0 to 10 scale every time the team meets. So here's an example for Chris. Young person named Chris. Again, priority need. Chris needs to feel like there's a reason to go to school every morning. The outcome that we're working on is to reduce his suspensions from school and his office referrals for bad behavior in schools, for his big behaviors in class. So what's the care coordinator tracking in this first 4 months? He's simply tracking the degree to which the team feels like we're meeting this need on a scale of 0 to 10. How close are we to meeting this need? Chris needs to feel like there's a reason to go to school in the morning. Well, back here in the planning process, people looked around at the resources. This school has got older kids who are volunteering to be mentors for kids who are struggling. Chris had never been hooked up with one of them. They found this guy that he really admired, who's on the football team, who hangs out with him, talks with him about how he's feeling every day, checks in with him to see if he's doing well. Chris does not want to mess up with this new peer that he's been connected to, checking in with him and watching him. And he looks forward to going to school and working with him. He also has a more proactive behavior plan in a couple of his classes that he's experiencing the biggest struggle with. If he feels anxious because he is struggling to understand the content of the class or the assignment, he's allowed to excuse himself briefly. Another new part of the plan. Look at the extraordinary success that this team is having on that first priority need of helping Chris overcome his anxiety and feel like there's a reason to go to school every morning. The rating of how close he is to meeting that need over the first 12 weeks has gone from 2 to an 8. Chris wakes up wanting to go to school in the morning. And in his last week that they evaluated success, he only had one instant in which he was referred to the office. Track progress, celebrate success, adjust as necessary. Finally, the transition phase. There is a point where the team no longer needs to meet regularly. Could very well be that Chris's one need was to overcome those big behaviors that were getting him kicked out of school and perhaps that were contributing to some sort of substance abuse with some friends that he shouldn't be associating with. He might be ready for transition after 12 weeks. But obviously a lot of young people in Wraparound are going to take much longer. Regardless, the point is we know when formal Wraparound is no longer needed. When does that happen? When we see this progress towards the priority needs. Transition out of Wraparound may involve a final meeting, a small celebration, or simply the family deciding they're ready to move on. They make a plan for the future. The family gets a record of what was accomplished so they can use it with future helpers. And sometimes some transition steps are needed, like practicing responses to crises or problems that might arise. The whole idea of Wraparound is over the course of involvement in formal Wraparound is moving away from professional services and formal supports to more community-based and natural supports and informal services. So that's the summary, and you're going to get a whole lot more detail about the 4 phases of Wraparound and the activities and examples from families like Oliver Post's family over the next few weeks. Later in the course, we're going to learn a little bit more about the research base for Wraparound and the kinds of program and community supports that we need to get in place to make sure that all of this happens in the real world. The theory about all of those phases and activities that I just described is that if we bring Wraparound planning that adheres to the description I just gave, and our helpers are actually living up to the 10 principles of Wraparound, we're going to have effective Wraparound teamwork that leads to a high-quality Wraparound process. Services and supports are going to work better because they're better matched to the family's own idea of their priority needs. But the family's also going to participate in a Wraparound process that builds their own confidence and their own capacities because they're going to be surrounded by people who are modeling good planning and who are providing social support for them. And in the end, positive youth and family outcomes will result from better plans and families who are better supported. I'm going to skip that last slide and just conclude by saying good luck with this week's assignment, and remember that your assignment is to complete a relatively small amount of readings this week, 2 chapters from the resource guide to Wraparound. Second thing you're going to do is go back to Oliver Post's vignette. We want you to do 2 posts to the discussion board, 2 original posts. One is to identify some potential team members that you think could be part of Oliver Post's team. Put them up on the discussion board. And then the second original post you're going to do is to consider the phases and activities of Wraparound, those 2 chapters in the resource guide and this lecture. What is one way that you could apply one or more of these kinds of activities in your work or in your internship, or maybe even in your life? And then, of course, read and respond to one classmate's post, write an entry in your journal, and hopefully have fun and enjoy this week's assignment in the class. It's been nice to give you this lecture, and I look forward to seeing you on the discussion board.